So today we have some more fun tidbits from the Rebirth Ultimania, as well as that Advent Children screening that took place a little while back. And the developers are talking a little bit more about the compilation of Final Fantasy VII and how and why they're including those aspects in the Remake Trilogy. There was also a really cool mod with Zack and summons in Rebirth that is pretty sick. And the Final Fantasy franchise is celebrating a massive sales milestone that we will get into. So if any of that sounds cool to you, smash the like button with a howling moon in honor of Red 13. And if you're new here and you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Now, before we get to the Final Fantasy news, I want to briefly touch on Silent Hill F, which got its first official transmission showcase last week, and it looks incredible. I'm fairly new to the Silent Hill universe. I hopped on board with Silent Hill 2 Remake, and I absolutely loved that game. It was my runner-up last year for Game of the Year, right behind Rebirth. It was that good. And it was a game and a story that just hit me really hard, and it still sticks with me to this day. Now, when it comes to Silent Hill F, we did get teased this project a few years ago, but then they went radio silent, pun intended there. But now we got that showcase and a brand new trailer, and the game looks sick. So it's going to be set in 1960s Japan, which is super cool. It's also not going to be in the town of Silent Hill, but Silent Hill these days is kind of more of like an idea sometimes too, and it doesn't always have to be in the town from what I'm learning. Our protagonist is going to be a young schoolgirl by the name of Shimizu Hinako, who is going to be dealing with some pretty traumatic stuff based on what we're seeing in this trailer. Some really gross out, grotesque body horror in particular. And it's going to be written by Ryukishi07, from my understanding is a very well-renowned Japanese horror author and just author in general. He's also a big Silent Hill fan, so he was super excited to jump on board and craft the story and the setting and location for this game, and it looks like it's shaping up to be something super eerie and creepy. Now, they also said that one of the reasons they set this in Japan is because Silent Hill is a franchise that has been developed by Japanese developers, but over time it definitely took on a much more westernized depiction with its characters and its stories, and they wanted a Silent Hill that got back to those Japanese horror roots, and you 100% see it with Silent Hill F from its location, especially the monsters. Everything just looks so grotesque, but also just oddly beautiful too in some situations, and I'm just super excited. Locked in now for Silent Hill F. It looks astonishing, and I cannot wait to play it. And I know we primarily cover Final Fantasy here on the channel, but anytime I get to talk about something not Final Fantasy, it's a nice change of pace and it's super exciting. So let me know in the comments down below. Are you someone who is new to Silent Hill? Are you a big Silent Hill fan? What are your thoughts so far on Silent Hill F? Now, moving over to the Final Fantasy Milestone, this comes to us directly from the Final Fantasy Twitter account, where they are celebrating that the Final Fantasy franchise has now sold well over 200 million units of all of their games across the world, which is insane. They also let us know that the Pixel remasters have officially sold 5 million copies, and those things just keep selling like hotcakes. Everyone's looking for them. They sell really well. It's also a really beloved collection of Final Fantasy games pre-7. But this is cool because the last time we got a sales milestone, I believe, was last year in October on my birthday of all days, where at that point in time, the franchise had sold 195 million copies. Now, since then, they've crossed over 200, which is incredible. And it's just really awesome to see big franchises like Final Fantasy and Monster Hunter and Resident Evil that have been around for decades that are still going relatively strong for the most part and still selling very well. Now, that means that since October to now, they've sold over 5 million units of Final Fantasy games. Obviously, a big chunk of that is probably the Pixel remaster, but also I think Rebirth in general, not just the PS5 version, which I think had a resurgence with the PC port, but that PC port of Rebirth in particular just performed exceptionally well based on some of the information we have out there. And while we don't have concrete numbers, what we do know is that whatever sales expectations Square Enix had for Rebirth in terms of its quarterly performance, which means that they expected the game to do X amount of copies in X amount of months, whatever they expected it to do in those months, it did in 1 week, which is bananas. And you had websites reporting anywhere from 400 to 600,000 copies sold in its first week, and then there's the more unreliable places like VG Charts and that kind of ilk that were saying that Rebirth somehow sold 1 million units in its first week, but take that one with a massive grain of salt because you can't really trust those websites. But either way, this is just to say that Rebirth Rebirth seemingly is doing very well, and just Final Fantasy in general has now sold 200 plus units, which is nuts. But either way, we know that Square Enix is going through a lot of restructuring, and they're kind of figuring out what to do with Final Fantasy. And if you're a franchise that has been around this long, whether it's Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Tekken, every franchise goes through ups and downs in phases where they're not performing as well, and they're just trying to figure out, what do we do next? So I think that's kind of the phase that Final Fantasy is currently in, but I think they can dig their way out. Now moving on to the Ultimania news, which we are going to be pulling again from the Shinra Archaeology Department. Great folks over there. They do a lot of great work, and their YouTube channel is insane. The production value on their videos is top notch. There's so much going on with the animations and effects and jokes. I have to rewatch some of their videos multiple times just to catch everything, but they do good stuff over there. So our first one is about that loveless action sequence with the Rebirth cutscene director, Hidekazu Miyake, where he goes on to say his favorite cutscene from the game is the loveless action scene. They used anime-type visual techniques and packed in as many complex and challenging action elements as possible. He encourages multiple viewings. Damn straight. When I played through that sequence, there's so much going on in terms of the QuickTime button prompts that it's really difficult to focus on all of the beautiful action. So once I completed that scene, I paused the game, I went back and I rewatched the footage just so I can actually enjoy the action of what's happening. And it's so beautifully animated and well done. You've got Cloud doing like some Noctis Warp Strike type things. The costumes the characters get to wear are gorgeous. I really wish that they would have made those available once you've beaten the game, or maybe as free DLC. I do know that Red 13 gets his costume, but it would have been cool to have Barrett running around in that demon armor and Cloud in that really old school medieval type of knight get up. But that entire sequence itself, not just the action sequence, is just so well directed. And it's also a very beautiful scene because we get the loveless performance with Aerith, where she sings No Promises to Keep. And it's just a really beautiful send-off for her and the party, but also to Avalanche. Seeing the spirits of Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge there and seeing them for the last time definitely choked me up. But if I remember correctly, Chadley, the robot, is also there. And I think that's a very big character moment for him too, because he's this cybernetic kid and he's starting to become more human, kind of like Pinocchio. And he's starting to question so many things about himself and his existence. And, you know, if I die, will I return to the planet? And I think that was just such a big showcase for him on humanity and what being human is all about, and those human connections and the love that we create with one another and how all of that's formed. I think that's a really big, beautiful scene for him and just everyone involved. And it's just so incredible. I now kind of understand where Genesis is coming from when he talks about his love for Loveless, although he takes it way too far because he thinks Loveless is literal and that it's meant to be him, Sephiroth, and Angeal bringing this story to life, which is where he goes off the rails. The next one has to do with party AI as you explore the world, and this is from the lead AI programmer Yoji Shirakami, where he talks about partway through the production, they played around with the idea of just letting your partners just kind of jump into water and rivers if you were close enough to it and start swimming, even if Cloud wasn't in the water. However, for the final release, they decided not to do that, but he did say that it would have been a fun post-game feature if, when you were playing through on your second playthrough, if the characters just suddenly decided to go into the water if they were wearing their swimsuits. Now, what's kind of funny is that your party AI does still do some weird stuff when you're exploring. There's been so many occasions, specifically in Gongaga, where I'm running around, there's a ledge that clearly I cannot jump onto, but one of my party members just hops on up there. Whether it's Barrett, Aerith, or Yuffie, they're just hopping all over the place. So clearly they're very restrictive when it comes to where your character can go, but the party members seem to be able to go wherever. And I do hope that in part 3, there are less restrictions on what we can climb on and interact with. There's so many sections in Gongaga where it's like, just let me jump. Just let me jump up and I can reach this tower, but instead I have to kind of go around the area and find the right mushroom to jump on that will then get me to that tower. And I will say, first playthrough, Gongaga, bit of a headache. On my second playthrough, I appreciated it a little bit more because I wasn't stressed out about, I need to go here, I need to go there, how do I reach this spot? I could just kind of explore the inner workings of Gongaga on my own without stressing about too much. Up next, we hear from the cryptic legend himself, Tetsuya Nomura, on the meaning of Rebirth. Nomura goes on to say, like Remake in the previous game's title, the world is open to various interpretations. However, the main idea was to have it mean something similar to Remake. Also, he looked for a word that would sort of say it's fine to start from here, in order to let people know they could enjoy themselves even if this title were their starting point. Plus, even though Aerith is very much a key figure in the story of 7, this is also a story about Sephiroth. He thinks you could say the title applies not only from the perspective of the game's main characters, but from that of the person they're trying to defeat. In that sense, Nomura thinks Rebirth is a more character-focused term than Remake, which I would agree with. Remake, I think, applies more to a thing. In regards to the story, Sephiroth remaking things, remaking worlds, remaking timelines is what we initially thought, and changing things so maybe his outcome is now different, which is kind of what we've all been led to believe. And Rebirth definitely, like Nomura says, feels more focused on a person, someone rebirthing themselves, having a rebirth, becoming a new individual, which definitely hits home with Sephiroth and all of the stuff we're seeing in Ever Crisis and how he's reflecting on his younger self and how he, at one point in time, was just a really nice guy who wanted a normal life and family, but he was raised to be a weapon. He was experimented on, emotionally manipulated by monsters like Hojo. And because we still don't fully know what Sephiroth's endgame is, we don't quite know what he is rebirthing in regards to himself, or maybe trying to give birth to a new world. I think you can also kind of apply that to Aerith as well, because she's constantly changing throughout Remake and Rebirth and given new information and having it taken away. Then there's the Aerith in the live stream, maybe, creating new versions of herself to work with Cloud. There's so much going on. But the idea of those words, those themes, makes sense. Remake for a thing, Rebirth for a person. And I've seen a lot of arguments online recently. I think a lot of it has to do with shippers and trying to discredit characters like Tifa. It's all nonsense. It's insane. But the protagonist of Final Fantasy VII is Cloud. The antagonist is Sephiroth, but everyone else is still incredibly important. You don't win and beat Sephiroth without Aerith. You don't win and beat Sephiroth without Tifa. They're vital characters that work in tandem with one another. They're equally important. Everyone has their role to play, essentially. Up next, we have some unused dialogue and actions with Zack that modder NSKO1 discovered while messing around with the game. I will play the clip for you guys here.
Come on out!
So as you can see, not only is Zack capable of using summons, he has an actual voice line when he summons a summon. Try saying that 10 times fast. So this says to me that maybe initially they had more gameplay stuff planned for Zack, and maybe they just didn't have the time and space to finish it up and really flesh it out. We're seeing so much stuff that went unused in regards to script and cutscenes and battle stuff now that the game is on PC, and we did cover a video a little while back going over things like Sid and Vincent initially being a part of that final battle against Sephiroth, so I'll leave a link to that video in the description down below if you'd like to check out more of that stuff. But I wouldn't be shocked to hear this exact voice line in Remake Part 3, because they do have a habit of reusing battle sounds from previous games in the next game. And I fully expect, again, Zack to be a much bigger character in terms of his gameplay, so I think he's going to have beefier sections in Part 3 that will require him to actually use summons in battle and perhaps have a party fighting alongside him. So I'm officially on board for that because I think it'd be super cool. Just give me more Zack gameplay. He's got a freaking cool gameplay style that I want to take more advantage of, because we only just get a tiny little taste of what Zack can do in Rebirth. Up next, we have the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, and this is from Nomura and Nojima in regards to why they're incorporating so much of that stuff into the Remake Trilogy. Rebirth creative director Nomura says that Nojima wanted to try to connect all the spin-offs. They are currently working on that as a major assignment. In that way, characters from all the spin-offs, including novels, will appear in the Remake project. The 3 whispers that appeared at the end of Remake are inspired by Advent Children. Nomura says all of these are not separate stories, but will in some way all be connected this time around, which comes to us from that Advent Children screening that took place last year. Now, we won't spend too much time on this particular subject because we've been talking about it quite a lot recently, and I don't want to continue to sound like a broken record here, more than I already do. But I believe the developers once described this project as a love letter to Final Fantasy VII. So it would make sense that they want to take things from the compilation, whether it be Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, Crisis Core, some of the books, and find a way to organically incorporate them into the story this time around. Because if you look at OG FF7, it was a standalone standalone game, and then we got the compilation later on, which kind of tried to add on to the lore of Final Fantasy VII, but it kind of created some weird contradictions, and it just kind of felt a little bit like an afterthought to a degree. But this time around, starting from scratch, technically, they can now take all of those ideas and make them exist in this world in a way that makes sense. It adds supplemental material, but again, like I usually say, it doesn't overshadow the main story, and they're doing it in ways that work. For example, the cell degradation stuff, which I believe was introduced in the compilation, is now just part of the 7 Remake Trilogy. We see Cloud talk about it in 7 Remake before the Airbuster battle, where President Shinra is telling him about that soldier degradation stuff. There's one of my favorite moments in Remake where Cloud, Barret, and Tifa are in the Shinra building, and there's a soldier that recognizes Cloud. And he goes, "Oh, wait, Cloud, is that you? I was told that you got murked, man. Hang on, wait here. I'm gonna go get Kunsel." And it's like, holy shit, Kunsel's here now? And Kunsel was a character in Crisis Core that you sent emails to. He was one of Zack's closer friends within Shinra. There's the fact that we battle Hojo's VR skin, Weiss, in the VR simulator, and Weiss is using Dirge of Cerberus weapons. He's got, I believe, Azul's cannon, and I forget the name of the character, but it's the woman with the double swords that Cloud fights in Dirge. He's straight up using those swords. So Deep Ground is there, and they're finding all of these cool ways to just incorporate it in ways that work, and I absolutely love it. So now everything feels like one cohesive universe instead of having some stuff feel like it just kind of got tacked on at a later date and is now changing canon. I just love it. Especially those 3 whispers we fight at the end of Remake. A lot of us were like, hold on, some of this seems kind of familiar. Who are these guys? And a lot of people started to theorize, yeah, that's Kadaj and his crew. They have the same weapons. They have kind of their personalities ingrained into the abilities that they're using. It's such a cool way to do that. And that's what really kind of signaled to people, oh, we really are going to be doing some stuff that's different. They're including Advent Children isms in this trilogy, and they're spread all throughout Remake and Rebirth in a way that just kind of really piques people's interest. And up next, we have more Advent Children talk, this one coming to us from Kitase. And this was in reference to asking him what fans and newcomers can look forward to in regards to Rebirth having connections with Advent Children. Kitase says, the Remake project started from the desire to fully present the visual expression of Advent Children in the story of the original FF7. In that sense, the CG visuals, including the characters that originated from Advent Children, are connected to the Remake project, so he thinks there's much in common there. We'll stop briefly just to kind of address that stuff. 100%. When Advent Children first came out, it was the first time we got to see these characters in like the highest quality visual fidelity possible. The way we all saw them in the original game, they were brought to life in Advent Children, and it was beautifully done. And I've talked so many times over about how influential that film was to the film industry and how people these days are still talking about it and using it as references for their work. But what's even crazier is that we've reached a point in visual fidelity where the characters within 7 Rebirth, in-game characters mind you, not the CG counterparts, look better than what we got in Advent Children, visually, in terms of animations. It's astonishing what they've been able to achieve over that course of time. So now having these updated visuals of these characters, I think really does a lot for them because we see it carried over into other things. We see Cloud and Sephiroth in Smash Brothers, and they're clearly their Advent Children inspired outfits. Maybe Tifa will one day show up in Tekken 8 and she'll have her Advent Children outfit there too. Needless to say, the visual fidelity of these characters in these games and movies are insane, and they now just kind of match each other. Maybe not one-to-one, obviously the games look better, but it's now a great visual representation update for this franchise. We continue. In terms of the story, Advent Children itself depicts the world after the original FF7, but the Remake project essentially also follows the major elements of the original story. So timeline-wise, Advent Children's story should be positioned as one just beyond the story within the Remake project. He thinks it would be very entertaining to play the 7 Remake series, 7 Remake and Rebirth, while considering how the stories will be connected. Kitase, we're all doing that already right now. All of our corkboards are filled with red string and tags and photos of people of what's this mean, what's that mean, oh that's a reference to this part of the movie, that's a reference to Crisis Core. We're all doing that. I love it. That's one of the reasons I really love the Remake Trilogy is how just they're doing things this time around. It's incredible. But I want to talk about that last point in terms of Advent Children and its timeline should be positioned after this remake trilogy. What I think Katase is saying here is that it's not a given that Advent Children will in fact happen, because again, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of part 3. We could have a story that wraps up, the characters have closure, they get to say goodbye to Aerith and Zack, they deal with a lot of trauma and PTSD, and they essentially avoid Advent Children and are able to have a complete ending that gives the player a sense of satisfaction and closure as well. But I know some people are going to leave comments saying, but he's saying it, Advent Children takes place after the remake trilogy. This is the way I think of it. Okay, imagine there's a timeline, and I'm sure someone out there has already done it. Maximilian Dude has probably done this on his stream and I missed it. But imagine there's a timeline. The original timeline would be Crisis Core, OG FF7, Advent Children, and then Dirge of Cerberus, right? So you look at the remake trilogy. Oh God, I sound like an idiot right now. I sound like a conspiracy theory. It's technically the same for the remake trilogy timeline. Crisis Core and before Crisis, I forgot to mention that. The remake trilogy, Advent Children, and Dirge of Cerberus. That is how we expect it to play out. But based on how things are going in the remake trilogy, you could potentially erase Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus because those elements are already being included in the remake trilogy. And again, based on what I said before, we might end up with an ending that avoids all of Advent Children and Dirge altogether. So I think that's just what he means. He's not necessarily saying there's going to be an Advent Children. We just know that it's going to link up, which it's technically already doing. And just based on timeline wise, that's what we all technically expect. But again, there's so many ideas flowing on around out there. I've thrown around the idea of what if there's a section of part 3 where we get to play through that battle between Cloud and Sephiroth in Advent Children? What if the game ends, or we think it ends, and then boom, fade to black, and then it fades in, and the last section of the game ends up being a playable Advent Children? We have no idea what they're going to do, but I'm super excited to see what they have planned because I really love the way they've incorporated all of this stuff so far, and it's still leaving me not only excited, but guessing on what they're going to do next. And we'll end on a silly one. This comes to us from Nomura in regards to how the characters look. Nomura says deciding on how much realism to pursue was the first challenge in making Advent Children. At first, they tried to stylize it more, but it looked too creepy. Cloud's eyes were also bigger initially, but considering the various expressions he had to convey, they made it more realistic. And we have a very creepy photo of Cloud included. Looks almost like Cloud's very weird face on Zack's body from Crisis Core. He looks a little bit deformed, but I totally get what they're saying. When they did the movie, of course, they wanted the visual fidelity to be off the charts, which probably meant they wanted to change how the characters looked, but it just didn't look right. And the thing is, these are such iconic characters that we've come to look at for almost 30 years now. And it's a situation where whenever something is just slightly off with those characters, it makes everything thrown out of whack. And then you start to realize, oh, something looks off. And that's kind of what happened with the CG visuals in 7 Remake and to a degree 7 Rebirth. They look beautiful, but the characters do look a little different in those CG cutscenes compared to how the in-game models look. I personally prefer the in-game models. I think those look incredible. And I think when you're looking at some of the differences in the CG versions of those characters, their face shapes and their eye shapes are just a little bit different. And even that little bit of a difference can throw off how a character looks. And again, you start to go, okay, something is off here. Something doesn't look quite right, which is clearly what they went through with Advent Children, realizing, okay, we can't hyper-realistic these characters. We kind of have to keep them in that original art style that people know and love, so they still look like themselves. And I think they made the right choice there. And it just kind of makes me wonder, if in the future they decide to do another Final Fantasy VII type movie, how insane is it going to end up looking? Because it could set a new benchmark for animated films that the industry will want to use going forward. Now, with that being said, that is the video. It was a longer, beefier, chunkier video, but there's always cool stuff coming out about the Remake Trilogy from the devs and the Ultimanias that I think are super interesting and always lead to some really fun conversations. But let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below on what we covered in today's video. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.